It's my honor and privilege to introduce our next speaker, and we're going to have a fireside chat. He's a leader of one of the world's largest and most impactful companies, and he personally has a strong commitment to sustainability and security. He's also a thought leader more generally into how technology and society work together, and I'm excited to discuss some of those themes with him here today. Please welcome Brad Smith, President of Microsoft. Welcome, Brad.
You will.
Would you like water? Here.
Thank you. Great to see everybody. I think I'm one of the few people in the room dressed to go to a meeting with the government right after this. So, pardon the tie.
Dressed for DC.
Dressed for DC, yes. Will and I see each other in many places over many months. And I noticed when I came in this morning, he looked at me and looked at this tie, and I think it's probably the only second time you've seen me in a tie. I do have some.
Well, thanks for joining us here. So, I wanted to kick off with a few questions for you. I mean, we obviously take this in many different directions, but you're really keen on investing in technology to help solve the world's challenges. Tell us a little bit about Microsoft's strategy in there, and then how it comes in particularly relates to satellite data.
Well, ultimately, I think the role of any company is to find profitable solutions to the world's problems. If you're not creating a solution that actually solves somebody's problem, then why does anybody need you? And if you're not at least ensuring that your revenue matches your costs, you're not going to have a sustainable business. And so, what we see today is the opportunity to use technology, and what you're obviously doing, Will, and what everybody here is doing together with Planet, is really, I think, creating the ability to use data to inform the decisions that the world needs to make in order to address the great problems that we face. And it was wonderful for me just to listen to you backstage. We need to feed the planet. We need to sustain the climate of the planet. We need to protect the security of the nations on the planet. And we're very excited that we're a part of that. And I think you see these layers of technology coming together that really are helping us accelerate all of those initiatives.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And obviously, we're collaborating in a few areas, like the one area in Turkey, building damage assessments, so important for that emergency situation there. But tell us, where do you see our collaboration going? I mean, you obviously can collaborate with a lot of tech companies. Thank you for spending the time here. Why are you here, in short, if I could be so cheeky?
Well, I'm here for a simple reason. I really feel that what you are doing and what Planet is doing is of profound importance to the future of the world. Step back and think about it, I think, in these terms. When did history begin? It began when humanity invented language and then writing. That is what enabled people to understand the world around them and to pass that understanding down and share it from person to person, from generation to generation, to understand how things changed over time. Everything we know, everything we do, everything we fundamentally are as a species is built on that foundation. Now think about what you're doing. Think about what started 7 years ago. You created the ability for humanity to develop a database of what is happening on planet Earth in every single corner of the planet, every single day. And you started with visual imagery. You're now enabling the visual imagery to become more precise, and you are bringing online all of these other sources of data with these other spectrum as well. We literally, I think, have entered a new age of history. The ability now to look and understand what's happening over time in ways that never even actually made it into science fiction, I think, for the most part. And when you take this data and you add AI to open up the data and make it easier for more people to understand what's going on, we have created a new ability for humanity when we do our best work, to accomplish things that were just not within the realm of possibility before. And so, it's just extraordinary what all of us in this room have the opportunity to contribute.
Yeah, so basically we've turned on this accountability system starting 7 years ago, and it's brought this many interesting use cases. Obviously that Bloom, but in Ukraine, when the Russians were pushed back by the Ukrainians, they exposed war crimes essentially, and now we can look back at the history of what took place again, and it's compelling. But how do we ensure during this new technology boom that we really democratize access to all of this stuff? Because it is important that, in principle, these tools can be democratizing, but it doesn't happen by default. How do we lean in and ensure that everyone gets access?
I think there's a few things that come together, and I think you covered it well. I mean, I love the phrase you use, Will, that the fundamental ingredient for accountability is transparency. We should all feel good that we have entered an era where it is a lot more difficult for people to hide the bad things they're doing, whether it's the Russian military amassing tanks at the border, human rights violations, the destruction of water towers, schools, and hospitals, or balloons that are spreading around the planet. And it does start with the data layer, and then it's these other companies that are building on top of it. I love Synthetic. It's in my home state of Wisconsin, and their ability to use AI, or our ability at Microsoft to use your data to identify every single day in real time, fundamentally, when is a new school been targeted and destroyed in Ukraine. That is advancing accountability. I do believe that this next era of AI, with GPT-based technology, a queryable Earth, as you mentioned, or to be able to look at a state, to be able to look around the world for renewable energy. All of that is basically combining not just layers of data and technology, but startups that are building on the data sets. And then the fundamental thing is to make sure this is accessible to everyone. And one of the gaps that we're trying to help close is, frankly, the data science gap. For every 5 data scientists in the global north, there's only 1 in the global south. Or if you compare, say, Europe and Africa, for every 14 data scientists in Europe, there's only 1 in Africa. That's why we've opened up now new data labs in Cairo and Nairobi. It's really about spreading this expertise and access to know-how. And then, frankly, also, the other thing that will make a huge difference is, with GPT-based technology, translation. Because only 5% of the world speaks English, but 95% of the world's scientific literature is in English. And so the ability now to make that much more accessible to people who don't speak English is fundamentally good for the world.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about just the sheer translation exercise. And I know, by the way, you guys, as you mentioned, have these Africa development centers, and I was privileged to visit the one in Kenya, in Nairobi, and I'm glad that we're collaborating there to get access to African scientists, our data as well. I think another thing is that as we add these AI tools, obviously, increasingly, you don't need a PhD in GIS, geospatial intelligence, in order to actually grapple with this data. It enables it easier to, if you like, get some value out of it. But talking on that, just on the ChatGPT, and a lot of discussion is happening now on how we regulate that and the challenges that it poses. Because as I said, there's fantastical benefits. There's also some challenges. How do you at Microsoft think that we, especially given your involvement with OpenAI, how do you think that we should regulate and govern those technologies, given how quickly they're coming up?
There's actually 3 concepts I'd love to bring together, Will, and I connected a couple of dots because I think they're really important. I think the first thing to recognize is how this new technology is lowering the barrier to entry for people to get the value out of data. It's not just a translation aspect. We've been embarking, and we at Microsoft have been focused on broadening software development to what we call low code, no code, the ability for people to create applications with, frankly, fewer years of computer science training. GPT-based technology, brings that barrier down substantially lower again. And now you're going to have people focused on what they're calling prompt engineering. As somebody who started as a lawyer, it's called like asking good questions. The ability to basically engineer, in effect, access to these data sets and almost tune, in some cases, the data sets with the right kinds of queries. And that will be, I think, the next thing in some ways as we think about CS and AI education. That will be a good thing. Now, the second thing, it really connects that dot with what you said. How do we ensure this technology is used responsibly? I think the first responsibility is with the companies that create it.
I agree.
Yeah, and so that's us, it's others. We're working very closely in a variety of ways with OpenAI. Now, the good news is that this work didn't start on November 30th when ChatGPT was released. It actually started 7 years ago. So at a company like Microsoft, we have a sophisticated architecture that's grounded in enterprise risk management. It starts with 6 principles that we use to manage AI in an ethical way. We have a corporate standard or policy that imposes requirements and prescribes practices for our engineers. We implement that, through training, tooling. For any company at scale, you've got to create digital tools to actually automate some of these processes, especially testing at scale. And then you have a governance system with monitoring and oversight and auditing and reporting. So we're building on all of that. And fundamentally, when something like ChatGPT or really that model emerged, we started working with it last summer. So we had a red team. They went to work. They identified the risks. You start to measure them. And then you start to take steps to mitigate them, and then you make sure that your incident numbers are falling, just like a bug count, when you're creating a software program. And then we will need laws. We will need regulation. I think it's good that, frankly, an agency like NIST came out yesterday. And what I love about what NIST did yesterday is they did the first thing that any good government should do. They asked people for their opinions and their information. They said, before we try to come up with ideas, we'd like people to take 60 days and share their best thinking with us. And I do think above all else, the year 2023 should be a year for us to take the greatest in technology with the latest from Ted Lasso. Be curious, not judgmental. Let's all learn together. And then we'll take what we learn and use that as the foundation for the legal and regulatory structure we'll need. Because without that, without a regulatory floor, then I don't think we can have the confidence that the public needs and deserves that everyone is going to do this in a responsible way.
Totally. So that's what we should do in 2023. What about in 2024 when there's an election? I heard we're in DC here, so are we going to get through that with? One of the things I'm worried about is misinformation spreading online with these things. Do we think we can keep that boxed in enough to get through an election?
I hope so. I think that has to be our national goal. I think that that's one of the most important causes. And in a way, you were talking about this, I thought, very eloquently before. I do worry a lot about especially foreign nation-state cyber influence operations. The Soviet Union mastered this before the PC was being adopted. I was an early adopter and user of it. Especially from our perspective, we've seen the Russians, we've seen the Iranians, we've seen the Chinese, really develop more sophisticated influence operations, combining in some cases, tactics that go back to Machiavelli and then bringing them into the internet age and now, the AI age. And they will no doubt find new ways to use AI to target people and groups with more sophisticated falsehoods, with the goal, in some cases, especially I think the Russians, of trying to undermine the fabric of democracy. Now, we need a national strategy to respond to that. And I think it fundamentally is to detect, to defend, to disrupt, and to deter that kind of action. And even though AI will be used as an accelerant by these governments and countries, it is also a new tool that will strengthen our defenses. And in a way, look back to 2022. The Russians were engaged in a campaign to convince the world that they would not invade Ukraine at precisely the moment they were amassing weapons at the border. And the United States government used imagery, including from satellites, and transparency to warn and prepare the world and Ukraine itself to address this. And so in the same way, we're going to need to harden our defenses, but the key to hardening our defenses, as much as anything else, is more information, more transparency. I hope renewed vigor and investments in traditional journalism, great reporting. I mean, look at the New York Times piece. That's the new age of journalism. Journalism where great reporters are able to use this data to show the world what's going on. And that will be part of, I think, protecting our elections.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, because as I mentioned in my talk, there's a counterforce to misinformation online, this triangle. And you had mentioned when we last met in that panel in Switzerland that in a way, ever since 2014, many companies were helping build Ukrainian cyber defenses. We need to be building the defenses to this sort of technology now, I think, and some of it is triangulation from things like satellite data. I want to come back to the interest of folks here in this room. We're obviously, as a community, trying to tackle some of these challenges, obviously climate change, biodiversity loss. As a community, we're really, I think, we're bringing geospatial tools that help some of these challenges. But what advice do you have for this community coming with your experience in this as a technology company, but seeing what we're doing as a community? Where do you think we should focus our collective energies? What kind of things should we be focused on? Yeah.
Well, the first thing that I think is important to recognize, and the reason I love events like these, is that this is when you really discover that you are part of a community. You may work for a government agency, you may work in a university, you may work at a company, and then you come together and you realize we're all connected. And out of that connection, I think there is the opportunity to recognize that we're pursuing a common cause. And fundamentally, the cause that I think is worthy of our pursuit is the harnessing of this new era of technology in ways that are going to serve the public, the country, and what the world needs. So somebody who works at the White House, who I've made a comment to me last year that I found very insightful, she said, Jim Mattis was my mentor. She said, I grew up under Jim Mattis. And Jim Mattis, she said, would tell her, if you spend 80% of your time understanding a problem, you can then use 20% of your time solving that problem really effectively. And I think those are wise words, because oftentimes in the world today, if you think about public issues, or even think about what happens if you're negotiating with a partner or a company or a competitor, people start arguing about alternative solutions. I like my idea. Well, you like your idea. We don't like each other's ideas. Now, how are we going to bridge the gap? Usually, you bridge the gap by building a shared understanding of the problem you're trying to solve. Mm-hmm. So identify the problems you want to solve and make sure they're problems that matter to whoever employs you, to you personally, and to the world. And then use these tools, use this data, use AI to build a shared understanding of that problem. And then out of that shared understanding, accelerate the work to solve it. And do it in a way that bridges our organizational divides and recognizes that we're part of a common community.
That's great. I love it. I love that advice. And I spoke a little bit about this carbon forest capability that hopefully we would like to underpin or help underpin some of the efforts in carbon credits. I know you guys at Microsoft have lots of carbon to offset. Are you going to buy them?
The ones that we'll see. I'm not familiar with those specific ones.
Just kidding.
But no, let me, it's a great thing to maybe close on though, is sustainability, and put it in two perspectives. I mean, one is this kind of work. I mean, we've committed as a company to be carbon negative by 2030, which basically means we need to reduce our emissions, including scope 3 emissions, by more than half, and then be purchasing carbon removal. We're already the world's largest corporate purchaser of quality carbon removal. But the other thing I think is worth thinking about, when 2020 began, we had this event at Microsoft outside Seattle in January and said, here is our moonshot, if you will, for our company around climate. And I felt then, and still feel today, that climate is the issue of the decade and perhaps the century. But that was in January, and by March we were sending everybody home because there was this new thing called a pandemic, COVID, that we were dealing with. And all of a sudden that was the issue of the year. And just as we finally worked our way out of the pandemic, started to see the light, there was a war, the biggest war in Europe in 70 years. And then you had macroeconomic turmoil. And yet we still need to save the planet. And so we need to do multiple things together. What's the one thing that will enable us to do all of them more effectively? It's what you all are doing right here. Keep doing what you're doing here.
Well, I can't think of a better way to end this. Thank you very, very much, Brad, for joining us on stage. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Thanks a lot, Brad.
Thank you.